in front of the people we are placed during the week. Or the fellowship and the prayer of our prayer group, where that grace and that is tested also. Or most certainly the grace of the confessional, where we have to go with all the incidents of lack of kindness and lack of gentleness. The grace that we receive there in the area of healing is also put truly to the test. So this is the spiritual practice where the game is lost or won, where we are truly put to the test, because it is primarily about the relationship we have with the people around us and their experience of Jesus Christ in us. Because, as Anne said earlier, the Lord has said he wants to return to the world one soul at a time, and he wants to do it through each one of us. This is his plan. He wants the people of the world and the people in our lives, in our families, in our workplaces, our churches, our communities, and everywhere we're involved, to experience him through us. He wants people to say, I met Jesus Christ today when I met this soul. The longer we spend with Jesus Christ, it will get to the extent that people will look at us and his eyes will be looking back at them through us. They will look at our eyes and they will know that they have encountered somebody special, not us, but Jesus Christ. And so we would follow the example of Jesus set out in Scripture, treating all others with his gentleness and kindness, not harshness, not condemnation. So this spiritual practice in particular, the culmination of all the others, is a very clear blueprint for what all of us are called upon to do in our church, and that is to evangelize. Simple act and a simple task, well, not so simple, but a very straightforward task of bringing Jesus Christ to the world, our little portion of the world, our family, our community. And Jesus gives it's a set task. It's a very special, particular role he's giving to us. Our church teaches that we are to bring the gospel to all the nations. And just because we do not travel, it does not exclude us from the task. It just means that we are supposed to do that whilst we're at home. In the prophet Isaiah we hear it written, "It is not enough for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back the survivors of Israel. I will make you a light of the nations, so that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth." This is the task he has given all to us as baptized Christians, and the call he has renewed to us in this apostolate, to bring him to all the nations. So to help us in this endeavour, I'm just going to reflect on a few lines again from Climbing the Mountain. And it's in the section of the book called Love of Neighbour. Because of course, evangelisation is love of neighbour. It is motivated by love of neighbour. And so I've just taken a few thoughts and a few ideas from this that I will share with you. For example, what we need to have a very keen awareness of, a very acute awareness of, with the people around us, particularly in our families, when we are seeking to bring Jesus to them, is not primarily an acute awareness of their sins and their sinfulness. But rather we should try to replace that acute awareness with an acute awareness of their woundedness. Because Jesus can be acutely aware of the sins. And invariably a person knows what their sins are, without us having to constantly point it out again and again. Rather, he wants us to be aware that this child of his is wounded, because he's very much aware that the person is wounded and needs healing, so that they can turn away and turn back to him. Anne has written, in speaking about treating everybody and venerating Christ in each person, is that we do that with respect and gentleness. Some might say, yes, this may be true, but I can see souls in error, in mortal sin, living far outside the heavenly kingdom. And she says, well, dear fellow apostles, this is when the call to treat them as Christ as is at its most profound. So rather than us falling into the temptation of having to point out, you're breaking this commandment, and this rule and that rule, and this is what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing, we need to be aware that this child of God is wounded and in need of great healing, and that Christ is asking me to be an instrument of that healing by showing respect and gentleness and kindness. Send the person to a priest. Encourage them after a period of time of just simply loving them and being kind to them and serving them. Send them to a priest. It's a gentle process. It won't be done by beating a person over the head with a line of scripture or indeed a teaching of the church. It won't happen. A person needs first to be loved and to experience gentleness and kindness, so that then, after a period of time, the teaching, the truth, the faith of our church can then be implanted and can begin to grow. So Anne would always say, send a person to a priest. You love them, and let the priest love them and direct and assist them in the way that he's called upon to do. So that's a very important assistance that I have received through this apostolate in my dealings with people as a priest, and then in my ordinary relationships. Another particular helpful thought is that if we are to bring a person close to Christ, we have to be prepared to suffer for them. And this is especially if it's at their hand. Because if we are bringing the Lord's peace and gentleness and kindness to them because we are united to Jesus Christ, a person may very often lash out at us. And we may be the one who bears the brunt of the pain, like an upset child kicking in the arms of its mother or father. The parent has to bear some of the pain of this situation. And we have to be prepared also to receive some of the pain of the individual. Because when we're wounded, we will strike out, and because we're in pain. So if we are prepared to suffer with a person and for a person, and even take some of their upset, the Lord will honour that for sure. Another very important help in our evangelization efforts and in our efforts to love people around us is to carefully examine for the presence of pride, judgment or condemnation in our hearts when we're dealing with a person. It's a very important thing to do, because if we're not aware of it, we can't ask the Lord to remove it. And if we're not aware of it, we can be sure that if it is judgment or condemnation or pride that's in our hearts, when we speak to a person, no matter what we say, we will communicate that condemnation, that judgment, and the person will not experience Christ, but they will experience a very poor imitation of Christ and will reject it. So it's not to frighten us, but it is to reassure us again of the great importance of eradicating these things from our hearts and allowing the Lord to put his gentleness and kindness and mercy into our souls. Preaching the gospel does not in any way mean simply quoting scripture or the catechism. Because I can quote a line of scripture, or I can quote from a church document, but if I quote it or I speak it without love, St. Paul tells us what this is. I can have all the eloquence of men or of angels, but if I speak without love, I'm simply a gong booming, cymbals clashing. I'm just making a racket. I am making noise. What the Lord needs us to have in our heart, as he tells us again and again, is his love. So truth is not facts necessarily. Truth is love. Truth is not necessarily simply just a quotation, but truth is love. And so when we eventually, if we're in a position to bring somebody closer to the faith of the church by quoting maybe a line of scripture or for using the catechism, eventually we have to make sure it is firmly rooted in a great love for this person.